Hey, it's me, David, your host of It Happened in Ontario, and I wanted to let you know a few things before we begin. When I decided to create this podcast, I knew that I would interview my next guest. I also knew he had a story that needs to be heard, especially by his friends and family so that they could have a better understanding of his world. It'd be a nice half-hour chat and good listen. But no, not all things go as planned. Up to this moment, Richard and I have talked for over 3.5 hours, and we plan to talk more. I've learned so much about family and loyalty and perseverance, and I want to share it with you. So I'm going to break the routine and drop our conversations over 4 or 5 episodes and take you on a journey. Richard and I can only speak via Skype, and there's a specific reason for that. To explain why, we have to go back to the very beginning. So Richard, where were you born, who was there, and how did that go?
Well, I'm not sure who was there, except for my mom and myself, obviously. But that would be when Toronto was called York, so the Western Hospital in Toronto, York. Now, obviously, 1970, so great decade. Missed the 69 by about 11 days.
There you go.
So the 60s, almost.
Right on. And so where are you living now?
I'm in Oshawa, Ontario here. And not quite Curtis, but right on the border. I could step over to one sidewalk and be in one side, and on the other side of the sidewalk be in Oshawa.
So if you were born in York, is that where you grew up?
Well, for the first couple of years, yeah, as a baby, and then from there, after some tragedy and stuff, we moved off to Trenton.
What happened?
Well, obviously in the early 70s, they're losing my father. And that's when my mom decided it was time to relocate, because I'm certain, not very much conversation went on about many happenings around that time. But I do know that, it was a change of scene for her to need to go down east.
So for those that don't know, you're my cousin. We didn't really get to know each other till we were adults.
It's 97, yeah.
Yeah. So your dad would have been my uncle, and so I know what happened to him. But did you know at the time what had happened to him, how it went down?
Yeah, it apparently went down shortly after they've been out at the hotel, the bar and stuff. And apparently my father accompanied my mom back to the house to see, because they had not been seeing each other for a little bit around this time. So he'd come back to see me and Mike. Mike was about maybe about 8 months old. He wasn't very old at all. So he wanted to check in, and I absolutely have zero memory. I have nothing.
Right.
I have no recollection, being near 3. So and the little thing that my mom added at this point was that he was trying to encourage her to hand me over to him, like she was holding me.
Right.
And said, "Here, well, just let me take him, sit on my lap," because I guess being woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning, just started being cranky as a young child like that. So he's like, "Here, I'll just take him," and then, as far as I understand, she said no. And then he got up. It's like, "I'm making a coffee." He got up, went to the cupboard, opened the cupboard, reaching up in the cupboard, and then was shot from through the kitchen window, as far as I understand. Of course, the guy fled. And he got as far, I'm not sure where we were, exact location, but he got downtown onto Queen Street, and he was pulled over by the police. And as the police approached the car, he kept saying, "Is the guy okay? Is the guy okay?"
Right.
And the cop's like, "I'm pulling you over. You got a missing light." He's like, "Okay, but is the man okay?" And the cop's like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, I just shot a man back in Scarborough."
He'd only spent like 7 years in prison, didn't he?
That's it, yeah. Very short.
He was a heroin addict?
Correct. I learned that as well.
Yeah.
I have an interesting tidbit in there that happened when I was about 10 years old. One day we got a knock on the door, and in came, like, my mom had been previously married, and in came in that day was my mom's ex-husband and another gentleman. We were sitting around the table, and the gentleman paid particularly a lot of attention to both me and my brother. He was doing things like joking around, and he was tying our shoes together and just doing things like that, and just being a character. And I remember noticing a lot of unease in my mom, and I just didn't understand what it was and everything else. And then the guy gave me and Mike at this time, this is like 1982, like he gave us like $10 each.
Yep.
And then I remember she whisked them off, like she seen them to the door and they were gone.
Right.
And we went off to our dinner, and we had our fish and chip dinner and everything else. And it was that conversation when I was 18 that she brought up, was like, the gentleman that showed up that day. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. And she's like, well, that was the man who actually killed your father. And my first questions were, well, how come you let him in? Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
And she's like, well, it's traumatizing when you open the door and you see the man. And the second thing is you do not want to create commotion, because then that would have sparked intrigue, and you probably guys would have been like, well, what's that all about, and who's he? And instead of answering all that, I tried to make the visit really short. And from my understanding, and she said that he was basically days out of jail and had just shown up to see how me and Mike were doing. But, that was something that she carried for a long time, that she was very upset this person showed up.
So there's an early look into Richard and Mike's world. In those days, having children out of wedlock was still looked at as a sin to some, and relations between their mother and outside family were strained. This is probably where the bond between the brothers really started to form, as they moved around and relied on each other for stability. Later, they opened a tattoo parlor where Richard became keen on the importance of sterilization. Eventually, that closed down, and we will dive into those stories later. But they were living in a fourplex in Oshawa, Richard and Mike and their sister Lisa. Mike landed what would become a great job in Toronto, and Richard was the acting superintendent at their apartment building. Let's resume the conversation there.
I noticed that we had about 4 or 5, maybe 6 garbage bins up the side of just like your little typical plastic garbage bins up the side of the house or the apartment. And raccoons were getting into them and things like that and causing quite a mess. Well, I'd go out and cut the grass, and I decided that I'll shore these things up and clean them up. And I noticed the neighbors would not take the garbage out, so it was attracting the raccoons more and more. So I volunteered at this point in time that I'll take everybody's garbage out. Just make sure you've got it in there the Tuesday night before, and I'll have it out bright and early, and I'll return the bins back up the side of the house. So it was my way to keep things clean.
Sure.
And that was one angle to things that had started a whole mess that this definitely follows. The next one was the neighbor that lived in the basement apartment come up one day and said, you guys need to call the owner. There's a big problem downstairs. And we're okay, what's wrong? And she said, well, I've got water that's already coming up to my ankles downstairs. And we're like, okay, well, what is it? And it was a main drain that was backing up. And it's actually funny that, we never told anybody. We actually caused it, and we didn't know at the time. We'd empty a fish tank. We dumped all the rocks and everything's down the toilet as well. So all from the fish tank, and it went out and it blocked up inside the tank under the ground in front of the building. But it backed up, and it smelled quite bad. And I think it was a Sunday, and we needed to call in somebody to come and fix this. And the only person that we could get was a plumber, but they actually only worked at the morgue. And these guys snaked the morgue drains.
Oh, geez.
And the first thing I thought was, not only is he now down there in sewage? But this man has worked with dead bodies. Like he's draining, he's snaking drains at the morgue.
Yeah.
And it was like, how that's gross. Like, what could we do?
Yeah.
And this person who lived downstairs was coming up and knocking on our door, and she was traipsing it all over the place. And all I can remember is standing there and looking and thinking, oh my God, she just touched my door. Like, she knocked on my door with this combo of sewage and this morgue guy. And it just started to really send my mind thinking if, like, what does a human touch that can really offset things? And this is where it comes into as well, that I continue to take out people's garbage, but the raccoons can continue to ravage those bins. And I started seeing people's personal belongings. So that came from, everything from sanitary products and just food and just everything all combined, what people would throw in a black bag.
Right.
And it's just, I no longer wanted to pick that up. And the landlord agreed. And I told the tenants, like, you have a mess. It's yours. That's not in our bins. Our bins are secure. They'd go out there and I'd watch them dig through this stuff all barehanded, and they'd walk back in and touch the front door to the building. And the moment was born where it's like, I don't touch that front door. I do not touch the door handle. I do not touch anything.
Right.
Now, while this is going down during this period of time, my mom's sister had passed away. And we went to her funeral. And when my mom passed away, I really oddly didn't grieve, even though I was very close to my mom. My mom was my world. That's all we knew. And it was, I grieved, but I didn't have breakdowns and things like that. But I broke down when my aunt had passed. But I had seen very little of my aunt, as I was mentioning earlier. And I think it was all just coming to me at that point in time, like everything was just hitting. And from there, it was just, I'm not touching this door. I just experienced more trauma. And everything was just a big whirlwind. And then I started to tell those around me, don't touch that door. Like, I don't care how we get through the front. We will be inventive, but we don't touch that door. And we did. We used to go down and with our running shoes on or whatever, you just put your foot on the side of the door handle, and it was a knob. It wasn't like a latch or anything like that. So it was quite difficult if you're out in the rain, etc.
Right.
But that's how we opened the doors. You kind of kicked it open, and it would wear down, and the landlord would wonder why the door's breaking all the time. But they come and fixed it. But that was the birthing of I'm gonna say easily OCD.
So we can see what's getting to Richard early on is cross-contamination. Somebody picks up their dirty garbage that the dumpster bandits enjoyed, and then they touch the same door handles that everyone else uses to gain entry to the complex. This too could have possibly been ingrained in his mind from his tattooing days.
I have one quick story regarding that. And this guy, he called us up and he said, you guys want to come down for a couple hours? I'm like, yeah, we'll show up. And we're in the shop, and he's sitting there, and he got a knock on the door, and it was 3 girls. And they were looking for last-minute tattoos, but they just wanted, like, the mole tattooed on their lip, just
Right.
like just little dark moles. And he's like, all right, we'll be quick, and we'll do this. And he tattooed the first girl. He put everything together, and he tattooed the first girl. He put the gun down, sat the other girl down, and he tattooed her. And he put the gun down, he tattooed the next one. So majorly right there, he just tattooed all 3 people with the same needle, equipment, right. No change out, no cleanup in between, etc. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. Yeah. So they left, and the next thing he did was he's like, okay, well, give me a few more minutes. I'm actually going to put together some needles for tomorrow's projects and things like that. So very first thing, everything's soldered. He picked up the soldering gun and started tacking on all the new needles. And the first thing I thought was, I don't care how much heat that is. I don't care what it kills and what it don't kill. The thing is that you're using the same object to remove dirty needles as you're putting on clean needles.
Right. So you're contaminating the new things.
Cross contamination.
Yep.
And I think that's one of my earliest things was cross contamination is a very real thing.
Sure.
And it's an everyday life that you may not think about. Picking up your garbage, grabbing your recycling bins, doing things like that. Cross contamination became early before I had gotten OCD,
right.
But it was something that was already there.
Hey guys, just a quick call to action break. If you're a podcast connoisseur like myself, you know that a series will have sponsors and advertisers to help offset the costs of producing your favorite show. Myself, I prefer not to bother you with third-party services, but keep it between us. If you find value in It Happened in Ontario, maybe you could buy me a Jameson's. Jameson's. I'll cover the overhead, and you get the tab. I'm providing a link to Patreon in the show notes, and it's a really simple process, and the series becomes ours, partner. Okay, so we're just wrapping up. Let's get back to the good stuff.
My first memories of there was a change in your life that affected me was one day my brother Troy said he went to visit you, and you had asked him to, I think before he came in, he had to put on a new pair of socks.
Correct. That was all from that part where I was saying where they had the sewage flood. So after this event we had with the flooding and everything, it was like I had those moments where everybody just stop and let's think about what happened.
Right.
And how we don't bring that into the apartment.
Right.
And he came and, he's proceeding up into the apartment. And, he'd step out of his shoes like he always did, and step into the apartment. And I'm like, stand still, don't go anywhere. And he's looking at me like, wow, what's going on? I'm like, your socks are garbage. You cannot go home with those socks. Even after telling him he's changing his socks, like I'm providing him with a new pair of socks.
Right.
Even the socks that he has, they're going in the garbage. And it's like, I'll just take them home and wash them. Like, you can't, because if you do that, you're not coming back.
Yeah.
Because you're going to contaminate the rest of your laundry. And short story from there, like, I don't remember much more after that with that incident, but he complied. And then every time he did come back, it was getting worse. Now I was telling people they had to roll their pants up at the bottom a few inches so that the scuffs of their pants never connected to stairs coming in. And he slowed coming, of course, and then just one day he was out there, and I'm like, I can't have anybody in. Like, I'm just no longer letting anybody in, because it's not a usual thing for you to go visit someone and you're changing clothes.
No.
Or now stepping out of your shoes onto another surface that you are protecting, and then making that another transition onto your carpet. So it was, and that situation in my family lasted it still lasts to this day. So
now at no point are you allowing anybody except for who you have living in the home in and out of the house, right?
We no longer were allowing people in, but we go out, and once we got out and did our thing, we would come home and pretty much decontaminate. Like, we wouldn't stop ourselves from enjoying the outside, but the decontamination part started to become lengthy, and it didn't matter where we were. And being the vehicle was also bought used, so it was like, alrighty, this is somebody else's vehicle, and I don't want to bring that in and put it on the furniture. So the first things were, okay, everybody comes in, and one by one, we just kind of stood around in the living room and You went and had a shower. Didn't matter if you came back at noon. Everybody had a shower. If you're in for the day, you're having a shower.
Right.
If going out, you don't sit down. So it started to translate to the outdoors like that. It started or transitioned to the outdoors. And
Really? So by don't sit down, you don't sit down anywhere when you're out of the house.
I was like, well, we were sitting down at the Wendy's, and I don't want to sit down on the couch. So if we went back at home for anything, pick up money or just kill time or something, just sit around. Don't sit down.
Before you shower.
That's right.
Wow.
So we were stopping not only just the little hallway that we had that was contaminated. It was now, people are, if you're like this, your neighbors look like this and do this. The society's doing this at the local Wendy's or the mall bench or just things like that. So it was like now we're shutting off from the outside world. We come and visit. We would visit your mom. We would visit you, and the odd time we went, 1 or 2 times we went to Troy's. But when we'd leave, and we would never say, okay, well, we're going now because I got to go home, and my showers are no longer. I just got in and had a regular shower. Once I stepped outside my apartment, I had to go back, and it was going to be a very lengthy decontamination. Didn't matter where I was outside. And I never told anybody because obviously people take that and think that is them.
They're going to take it personally.
If I said I went home and had 3.5 hours, which was timed, in the shower, and somebody'd say, well, I clean my house. I'm not a pig. So how does this translate into you go home and needing a 3.5 hour shower? And,
right.
It's new and confusing to myself. I just chose not to tell anybody. So it's the times and things that we chose to leave or how we did these things. Those were in thinking about going home and knowing how long it was going to take to shower and decontaminate from being outside.
Right. Well, I can remember the very last time that you and Mike came to my place. We talked a little bit, and you confided in me that you were having some issues with leaving the house and stuff like that. So I remember asking you if there's anything particular about my place that you needed addressed, and you said no. Once I get out of the house, I'm pretty good. The only thing is, if you drop some food on the floor, do not pick it up. Do you remember that?
Exactly. Yeah, I do.
And I was like, well, I have a dog. Is it all right if the dog goes and eats it? And you were cool with that. So
yeah, no, as long as it wasn't getting picked back up.
Yeah. So, and that's the last time you came to my house. We've managed to hook up together 2 more times after that. Once was at Emily Park, and then the next one was the family reunion, and that's been it.
Was that like 2011?
It would have been 2012. Yes, it was 2012.
Okay, because we hadn't yet. Mike had purchased the home in 2013, right. And I remember that we were living in the apartment, another apartment, because we moved from Oshawa to Ajax, and it had everything to do with the environment we're in. We moved from Oshawa to Ajax, thinking that I was going to get a brand new start.
Right.
And that's all we needed was to get out of the environment because
you were going to get a mental reset.
Right, and get away from the landlord who now we would call up and say, the neighbors are completely ignoring, and it seems like they're wrecking the garbage like they're doing it on purpose just to watch me go snaky.
Right.
I had almost gotten into a fist fight with our neighbor a few times because he would be foolish. He would go out and on a Saturday evening, he would go off and go to the pizza shop, and he'd be back with a pizza loaded up in his arms and everything else, and he's ringing our doorbell to let him in. And it was kind of like, I don't want to go down and kick the door in front of the neighbors because I'd be like, "The fuck you doing?" Excuse me.
Right.
All
right.
But I go to my window and I said, hello, and I see him there, and I'm like, oh, geez. And he says, yeah, let me in. I'm like, you didn't take your key? And he said, no, I just went to the pizza shop, but this door locked, and I need in. And I'm like, I'm not letting you in. You're going to have to figure another way in. And he's like, you're not going to come and open this door. And I said, no, because simple fact is you're foolish for leaving your keys in the house. I'm teaching a lesson. But in my own mind, I'm like, I am absolutely not kicking that door. I'm not going to kick the door in front of him because it might break, and the landlord's going to know we're breaking it.
Right.
And finally, he actually got the door open. He had his keys on him. He got the door open, and he walked by and he hoofed my apartment door. Well, that was war.
Right.
The door, we opened the door, and we exchanged niceties and decided we were going to tangle on the front lawn. And I immediately went into the mode of like, I can't fight this guy. Like I got OCD. Like what happens? And what if I hurt him? What if he hurts me? What if, what's going to happen from there? So a million things going through my mind. But of course, Mike, no OCD. He doesn't care. He's going out. Rocky's going out the door.
Yeah.
So I had to put a stop on him, because a lot of people assume OCD is always about being clean. Now, we have been talking about this, that germ phobia and everything else. I think the germ phobia was all by itself. OCD was just making sure it was blossoming.
Right. Because
not everybody with OCD is necessarily clean. It's a compulsion that, you stick to something, and if it's bothering you and haunting you, you'll stick to it. It becomes your way of life. That's right. Just what you're doing.
But now it's progressed from then. In
the apartment, and this was occurring at the time that the last time we seen each other, and that was in 2011, 2012. It started becoming where those showers were 4 hours easy. They were timed, so it was nothing shy. It's not exaggeration. 4 hours is where I had to know that I've scrubbed enough. I'm done. Like it's right. You can't get any cleaner. And at this point, those became too much, and skin irritations and things like that. So now I stopped even getting out of bed, because that meant if I was getting around my apartment, I was getting dirty.
Right.
So for the 2 years, I stayed in bed, and the only time I got out of bed was to go to the washroom. And when I went to the washroom, I had to have a shower.
So here we are with Richard now living in bed. His brother and sister are trying to live their lives. Tensions are rising, but loyalty is deep-rooted. Meanwhile, Mike is getting pestered by a friend to buy a house. Is this a good idea or disaster waiting to happen? Guess you'll have to wait and see. It Happened in Ontario is recorded at Treblecock Studio in downtown Peterborough. For more information, go to treblecock.ca. Thanks as always to my dear friend Paul Thompson for the music.
I've blessed others, been blessed in return. I've seen a few miracles. Life is a mystery.